Hi, my name is Beril.
My name is Kasey.
And my name is Morgan, and today we're going to be discussing the barriers to education for international college students. Why is this topic relevant? International college students face unique challenges when attending school in another country, compounded by challenges that all college students face. These challenges create barriers to education, and COVID-19 has added on further complications.
Okay, here's a summary of our presentation. First, we'll be talking about the impact of COVID-19 on education for international students. Second, we'll be talking about the challenges of remote learning for international students, and that includes battling the online learning environment and the decision to return home or not to return home from school. And lastly, we'll be talking about the mental health challenges that international students face specifically.
Hi, everyone. I'm Beril, and I'll be presenting the impact of COVID-19 on international students' college plans specifically. Firstly, as COVID-19 continues to spread throughout the world, many students reconsider their college plans, including international students. The first point is the student mobility, whether students will come to US for their education or not. There are still some travel restrictions all around the world that will not allow some students who want to get a college education in the US to actually come to US. And according to the data provided by World Education Services, 67% of the students are still generally interested in studying stateside, while 13% are even more interested in doing so. This finding inspires some hope that the long-term impact of the crisis on international enrollments in the US may be less apocalyptic than feared. To conclude, many students see COVID-19 as a temporary phenomenon, and they are still wishing to continue their college education in the United States. On the other hand, still there is a 20% of international students who are no further interested in studying in the US. Another point worth mentioning is the economic concerns as the COVID-19 pandemic is taking place. 79% of the prospective students surveyed by World Education Services expect economic conditions in their home country to be negatively affected by the pandemic. 43% fear that they will no longer be able to afford studying in the US. Considering the extraordinary increase in inflation and unemployment rate in the world, the students who will be affording to study in the US might see a drastic decrease. Additionally, many people are considering whether online education is a viable option for college education, which we will further mention in our capstone presentation. But shortly, according to data by World Education Services again, it says there are some doubts about how popular online options will actually be for international students, especially among students already enrolled in degree programs. Fully 32% of the international students surveyed by World Education Service said that they would not continue their studies in online mode, while another 30% were undecided, and 32% said no. Moving on, there was a study conducted with Chinese international students who would like to study in US next year. And according to the data, 48% of the Chinese international students want to have a gap year and wait for a year to start their college education. Another survey conducted, which will help us understand the impact of COVID-19 on international students, is focused primarily on exploring differences between students currently in their home country and those already abroad, in terms of the likelihood of impact on their studies, students' change in plans, expectations of university responses. The key insights from this analysis includes students who are currently in their home countries are more concerned about travel restrictions, study budgets, and challenge to completing their current studies. Secondly, students are already studying abroad are more pessimistic in their expectations of how COVID-19 will impact their future study plans and are more likely to consider online learning or postpone their studies or wishing to take a gap year. And 70% of those students say that they would rather stay in their home country than study in the US while coronavirus pandemic is taking place.
I will now discuss the challenges of remote learning for international students. With the transition into online learning throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, the students and professors of these schools will be affected differently depending on a multitude of factors. The first factor being the technology system of the institution as a whole, and this includes the media the school has available in order for students to access different information, the platform that all professors and students use to distribute that information, along with the outside resources that professors make available to their students. This learning environment does not only depend on the availability of this information, but whether or not the students are able to access it. This depends on if the student has Wi-Fi at home or if they're able to find someplace close to home with Wi-Fi connection. Of course, this is now limited due to COVID restrictions. Whether the class is synchronous or asynchronous is also a major factor contributing to the challenges associated with online learning. These synchronous class times can become a challenge when there is a large time zone difference between the student and the instructor, as well as make it difficult for taking scheduled exams, quizzes, etc. Not only that, but it can make it more difficult for the student to attend scheduled office hours or meetings with the professor, to receive help or discuss class material. Although asynchronous class times allow the student to complete their own work at their own time and pace, the culmination of the other barriers to learning this entirely online environment still presents a challenge to the student. This time zone difference does not only challenge the student to participate in online discussion and schedule class times that's different than their own, but also to maintain a schedule for all other school-related activities while running on a completely different time from many of their instructors and other fellow classmates. This can make it difficult when balancing it with other activities in their lives, as well as keeping the student engaged with the material, interested in the course, and for their ability to not fall behind in the course from miles and miles away. Miscommunication is another challenge that arises in the online environment, presenting whether the student is an international student or not. However, it is seemingly higher for international students due to the presenting language barriers, if English is not the student's first language, along with cultural differences in learning and education. One study found that international online learners felt a greater sense of marginalization or sometimes even alienation when compared to the American learner. These barriers are heightened when the learning is not through face-to-face contact, and rather through other forms of online systems. Outside of learning in classroom time, college is also a place for students to get together and connect, whether that be through different groups, clubs, student organizations, but this can be a challenge for the international student due to these differences in time zones, along with personal struggles or stresses that the student may be facing due to this pandemic. One student noted, "I've not been able to join any activities because I do not have the time since there is a lot of pressure on me because of personal reasons and because of the time difference." One of the other challenges that students face during the COVID pandemic is figuring out whether or not they're going to be able to return home. For international students, this decision weighs much heavier on their minds. Not only do they have to worry about potentially moving thousands of miles away from their institution to live at home with their family, but they have to deal with the stress of potentially contracting COVID-19 and spreading it to others. In some situations, students may not even have the option of going home. One student noted, "In 3 months, I will have to find another place to live because my family said they cannot support me anymore because their savings is also running out." The pandemic is not just affecting students, but is causing job loss and financial burden in many areas around the world, leaving the student to fend for themselves during this unprecedented time and adding to the list of worries that these students have to face.
For my portion of the presentation today, I'm going to be discussing the mental health issues that are unique to international college students and how those stressors may hinder academic success. So a lot of international students face challenges mental health-wise that a lot of domestic students don't really have to go through. So the first one is acculturative stress. To put it simply, acculturative stress is stress that comes with difficulties in adjusting to a new culture. So that can be things like learning a new language, making new friends, the new social isolation that you may be experiencing, and adjusting to a new place. Next is reduce social support. So when moving to a new country, you're giving up your social support systems from your country of origin. You're no longer surrounded by friends and family as you once were. And these systems are really important to mental and emotional well-being. Relatedly, international students may experience homesickness, which can lead to or even worsen depression. In addition, language barriers are an enormous hurdle that some international students need to work through. So language barriers can lead to poor academic success when the lectures are taught in a new language. Another thing that contributes to mental health challenges in international students is the enormous pressure to do well. So it's very expensive to send students to schools outside of the home country. The stakes are generally higher for these students, therefore there's more pressure to do well, and failure is generally not an option. And studies have shown that these factors, among many others, contribute to increased rates of anxiety and depression compared to domestic students. One study even found that international students were twice as likely to experience suicidal ideation compared to domestic peers. As one may expect, COVID-19 has exacerbated these challenges that international students face. So as we discussed previously, campus shutdowns left students with nowhere to live. And these students had to scramble to find living arrangements. And this was made even more difficult by financial concerns due to COVID-19, as many students became unemployed. So international students are more likely to be financially independent than domestic students. They don't have the same financial support from family as domestic students might. So many were left with the decision to return home versus staying in the United States. Next, COVID-19 has raised concerns about the status of student visas. So when colleges were first beginning to shift to digital platforms, there was a clause in student visas that limited the number of online classes that could be taken. Taking more than the permitted number of classes would invalidate the student visas. Fortunately, this clause has since been modified. Lastly, COVID-19 has led to even greater social isolation as social distancing and quarantining is encouraged. So international students who already don't have those fully fleshed social circles are even further isolated because of the quarantining and social distancing. As I'm sure you can imagine, all of the stresses associated with COVID-19 added to the stress that international students already felt. Despite the evidence that international students face higher rates of depression and anxiety than their domestic peers, they are also less likely to seek mental health treatment for many reasons. One reason is the barriers created by language differences. So in one survey, 55% of international students expressed concern that they would not be understood by their counselor if English was the primary language to use in therapy. The same study found that 77% of international students felt that cultural differences between them and their counselor would lead to ineffective counseling. Another reason why international students are less likely to seek treatment is because of the stigma and shame associated with counseling for mental health disorders. One Chinese student studying in the US said in an interview that in China, we usually don't do that, meaning seeking counseling. If you do that, people will think you're out of your mind, you're crazy, so we keep it a secret. In the United States, we're an individualistic society, meaning there's more emphasis on individual expression. We like to define ourselves as unique and different from the groups we're associated with. So in the US, mental health tends to be seen as a personal problem, whereas people from collectivist cultures, such as Asian countries, are more likely to value social harmony over individuality. So relative to people in individualistic cultures, they are more likely to endorse behaviors that increase group cohesion and interdependence. Mental health issues in those societies are seen as disruptions to social harmony, and they're seen as a reflection of the family rather than just the individual. Another reason why international college students are less likely to seek treatment is because it's relatively uncommon for other societies, such as Eastern societies, to seek therapy, and it's overall much less accessible than it is in the United States. So students may not even see it as an option for them. COVID-19 has added further obstacles to treatment as college campuses and their mental health services shut down. So even though international students are experiencing new challenges related to COVID-19 and mental health, they don't have the ability to seek treatment on campus. Instead, they have to go out in the community and find treatment, which they probably aren't likely to do. So here I have a graphic that provides a few examples of stigma, mental health stigma in other countries. So for example, in Korea, in certain areas, people with mental health problems aren't permitted to enter swimming pools. In Lithuania, people with long-term mental health problems are unable to own their own home. Looking at this graphic, it becomes pretty clear why people who do experience mental health challenges would be less likely to come forward to get treatment. So as a result of the factors I listed, many studies have reported higher rates of depression and anxiety among international college students compared to their domestic peers. And we know that mental health challenges contribute to poor academic performance. So what can we do to encourage international students to take advantage of campus mental health resources? One idea is that inclusivity is key. So this includes providing students with access to counselors who speak the same language, or even providing counselors who may not speak the same language with culturally sensitive training. In addition, peer support groups are also very important to mental health and well-being. Thank you so much, and here are our sources for our project.